So, all right. So, quick review of other stuff. The weekly quizzes, you're really only supposed to take those once. So, the reason that I have the two, like, I think I've set it to where you can take it twice, but that's just on the off chance that your internet checks out after you've done one question or something like that. So it wasn't so you could make your grade higher, you know, so you can look at the questions, find the right answer, and make your grade higher. Although I occasionally have some professional development like that, but it's usually about safety on the internet or something. So in case I miss a question. So that was not my goal there. All right. Okay. So World War II, some of you guys are ready. Some of you guys are ready. That's good. No, I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm glad. All right. Somebody else told me I didn't get them in the roll, so I'm double checking. Okay. World War II is interesting, I think. Oh, did I tell you? Oh, yeah, I did tell you. Only take the quiz once. I know you guys worry about points and grades and stuff like that, so I'll get to, you know, finishing more grading and stuff like that. I'm sorry I'm behind, but I think I'll say that every time I talk to you. I'm sorry I'm behind. The grading, it just takes forever. And I'll make a quiz, not a quiz, sorry, survey about the quiz sometime today. So if you guys can take that before Thursday, tell me what you thought about the quiz. Overall. I know a couple of you mentioned there were a couple questions you didn't like. Also, some of you will email me and you'll say, like, can you explain question 3 to me? Probably not, and not to be rude at all, but I usually click the thing where it shuffles the questions, so I'm not sure which question was question 3 for you, although I think maybe I can go back and look in your side and see which, I don't know. I'll look. I'll see. So if you ask me about question 3 or 5 or whatever, I'll try to go back and look and see if I can figure it out. So, and book review due in a month. So a little over a month and 10 days. So if you're thinking book review, now might be the time to pick a book. So, and I can't remember if I put a sample book review on there. I usually use my husband's because I know he, for a variety of reasons, he would not sue me for violating FERPA laws. A couple of reasons, both of them legitimate. So, all right, let me share stuff with you. You may or may not have noticed that in the, course documents section, the questions for Unit 3 and Unit 4 are posted. So I figured, you know, I might as well do all of them at once, get them up there, that sort of thing. So this question, I think, is super easy, and then maybe not. So World War II is often referred to as the Good War. Evaluate that title for the war. Is it appropriate? Why or why not? Okay. And I will say this to you the next couple times I talk to you. Just because the question is general doesn't mean your answer should be. I need some specific detail. I want some evidence that you learned something that you didn't know before about World War II. So if your answer is 100% Hitler was bad, killing the Jews is bad, the Holocaust was bad, not enough, okay? Pick something from the textbook that'll be useful. And oh crud, I often do like a little extra credity sort of thing in the World War II unit. So I'll have to think about if I want to add that or not. But it's usually about Japanese internment, which would be an interesting thing to bring up in this answer because, you know, it wasn't good. Now, I don't know anybody in the right, oh, that was too judgmental. I don't know anyone who would argue historically that our participation in World War II was not a good thing, and that defeating Hitler and ending the Holocaust and liberating concentration camps was not a good thing. So I would never expect you to argue that at all. But it doesn't mean that everything that happened in the process was wholesome and pure, that sort of thing. And when is anything ever completely wholesome and pure? It's pretty rare. So except your grandmother, yeah, I wasn't trying to say anything bad about grandma. So, all right. So is World War II a good war? Why or why not? I would mention, because it is U.S. history, some U.S. Contributions to the World War II effort. You could also talk about positive effects of World War II beyond defeating Hitler, although you can certainly mention that. I mean, defeating Hitler's a good thing. Yeah, no doubt at all. So, but find a few specific details, things that you thought were interesting in the discussion of World War II, maybe a couple of things that you thought were negative. You will see a few of those things. I mean, the service is still, the military is still segregated. There's still going to be some issues. The Japanese internment, that thing's pretty bad. It's really bad. And there'll be some things that happen that you may not like, but I know that overall you'll probably have a positive answer to that one. Okay, so then in question 2, Cold War was cast in terms of a worldwide battle between freedom and slavery. Why was it that way? Find some events that illustrate it and some consequences of that. That's a little more complicated question, but it won't be so hard once we get to that. And then civil rights movement question, always. Also, one of the things that I think you'll notice as a good result of World War II, unintended, of course, it really is the foundation, that and Brown versus Board of Education. It really is the foundation of the civil rights movement in a lot of ways. And then is the US more tolerant and open, freer during the 1960s? So I think these questions are a little more general in some ways, but you still get to use some very specific examples, hopefully to help you answer those. All right. So World War II. World War II. Oops, wrong thing. I know. Now I'm nervous because all of you are like, ooh, World War II. I hope we can live up to your expectations. Yeah. Goodness. All right. So here we go. Sorry. Get my roll sheet so I don't lose track of it in case someone else comes in. All right. Scroll back up. So sorry. Apparently I was looking over the notes. I'm done. So, and I haven't made your quiz yet because, I just haven't. But I typically will pick a battle or two. And I won't ask you the general, was it good, was it bad, that sort of thing. But it's 4 chapters. And then once we decide if you want the big quiz or the small quiz, my guess is you want the big quiz, but I'm just guessing. It'll be, either 4 or 2 questions per chapter, 4 or 5 or 2. You have 4 chapters in this unit. Okay, down to business. All right, so World War II, of course, started before we got involved. And we'll talk about how it starts, why we stay out for a while. And then we'll talk about what happens when we get in. Now, U.S. History Survey, it's not the world history or, I guess we call it a world history survey, the other history class that you take. So our emphasis is going to be U.S. involvement in World War II. So, if you're looking for the whole big thing, you'll get a little more of that maybe in the other history class, the world history or the European history class. However, we'll cover a little of it here. All right, so chapter starts with a discussion of the 4 freedoms: the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, which would be an emphasis for Dr. Foner in this chapter because, the theme. And we never really talked about this, but textbook-wise, one of the things that's kind of unique about this textbook, and part of why I picked it, is because you really have a single author. It's usually textbooks are written by a committee of people with a famous historian or 2 who put their name on it, and they probably do the overall thing, but you can tell by the writing style that different experts in different content areas write different chapters. So the unifying theme is supposed to help this be a little more readable and carry a theme throughout that maybe makes it more consistent. Plus, it's probably a sign that Dr. Foner is an expert on everything, which honestly is pretty close. But it's supposed to make the book more readable. So one of the things that he's trying to show you is that over time, the idea of freedom in the United States has changed. And it's an interesting point and probably a pretty good theme. You know, World War II brings us down to some very basic ideas of freedom. And certainly just the freedom to stay alive, of course, if you have from a certain ethnicity or group of people who object to how your government is conducting their business, certainly the issue in Germany. But Germany also thinking that they need more living room or Lebensraum, start to take over the neighbors. The neighbors aren't very excited about it, but they don't really have the ability to fight back. The United States, which might have the ability to fight back, doesn't have the desire, and also thinks it's not really our war. You know, we don't live there, it's not really our problem, it's more of a regional conflict until it's not. And then when it's not, we're in. Okay, so 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And FDR declares these essential human freedoms. So it's kind of a predecessor to the UN Declaration of Rights, because, you know, clearly it's 41, there's no UN, so there's no UN Declaration of Rights. But there will be discussions about creating something like this right at this time. Also, you know, at this point, clearly the League of Nations has failed. It failed in part because certain large countries, including the United States, didn't join, and the others who did join, when Japan started taking over Manchuria and certain parts of China, and Germany started taking over the neighbors. Protested, they said it shouldn't be happening, but no one took any action. So, and of course, so all of this is couched in the setting of the Great Depression, which is global and means everybody's broke and kind of introspective and isolationist, because they can barely manage their own business, so they don't want to manage somebody else's. Clearly, Germany is going to emerge from this depression, maybe a little early, by, say, taking over the neighbors and their natural resources through legitimate public works projects, roads, buildings, that kind of thing, and also building up the military. So some of that spending that they can't necessarily pay for, but eventually kickstarts the economy. I am not suggesting that World War II was a good idea because it ended the Great Depression, although you will find some really unusual historical commentators. I wouldn't consider them terribly professional, but again, judgment on my part, who will suggest that internationally people were wanting to start something like this to jumpstart the economy. I don't really, no, that's not, to me, that's not a good assessment, but okay. All right. And then I think your book does have pictures of the Norman Rockwell paintings. Now, if you like art, if art's your thing, and you'd rather write your book review about somebody who is an artist, I think Norman Rockwell might be interesting. But there's also, I mean, you don't have to pick, excuse me, somebody who's kind of mainstream like that, but you could. And I think that's an interesting combination of art plus propaganda plus like American idyllic images, that sort of thing. Also, who else? Oh, I was going to say somebody else during this era. Norman Rockwell. Crud, I can't remember. I don't know why I can't remember. Getting old. So Norman Rockwell is an artist. I don't know who else I was going to say. No. Oh, now I do. Dr. Seuss. I know he wasn't an artist, by the way. But Dr. Seuss writes quite a bit of anti-World War II, or not anti-World War II, but anti-Hitler sort of stuff during this time period through his children's stories. So there's lots written about the impact of Dr. Seuss on public policy, popular culture, that sort of thing during World War II. All right, back to business before I start to think of other weird things, although useful things, hopefully. All right. So Norman Rockwell illustrates the freedoms. but it's not all about, you know, saving your small town. And it is kind of all about the US becoming much more involved intentionally on the world stage, which has some really, you know, good and positive side effects. And then we'll have some interesting, potentially negative side effects where we become the world's policeman, whether the world wants us to be their policeman or not. And at times they do. And sometimes it's, you know, we do stuff that's really altruistic and in the best interest of almost everybody. And then sometimes we'll do things that won't look quite as magnanimous, shall we say. Can we say that? Okay. All right. So the era begins with the United States and a policy of isolationism because we're broke, you know, and some of it is, you know, we declare the good neighbor policy, that sort of thing that we're going to repudiate, say we don't approve of anymore, and we're going to say we're not doing that again. Repudiate the Roosevelt Corollary, which essentially says we'll invade, take over, run your economy whenever we feel like it, if we think it's in the best interest of our country and the world, that sort of thing. So we'll repudiate the good neighbor policy, which, you know, allowed us to invade Mexico and some other things, at least in our estimation. And we'll do that either because we've become more enlightened or we're broke. It's probably a little bit of each. And Cuba will take back the Platt Amendment to their constitution, which says we can intervene whenever we feel like it. Oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough, in the 30s, our Latin American friends tend to become more dependent on the US economy during this era as a rule. So typically, they're going to probably be more in line with our, whatever our desires are for their region, for their country, for our region, for the Western Hemisphere, than they were even before. So they're going to probably argue with us less and comply with us more. But part of it's international security, and part of it is, you know, our economy is going to start to be really productive, and we're going to start buying stuff from them, so it will enhance their economies as well. So, you know, economics, we all need money. We do take some steps to slow German influence in the Western Hemisphere, but as far as what's going on in the Eastern Hemisphere, we're just kind of staying out of stuff. Stuff that's going on, you know, Germany's taken over the neighbors and attempting some takeovers in the islands and stuff in the Western Hemisphere. Japan will invade Manchuria. Manchuria is a region that has a lot of natural resources. You've seen Japan on the map. It's small. Got a lot of people there, and I know they do terraced farming, and they're, you know, they're very productive, that sort of thing. The farmers are very productive, but it's only a certain amount of land. They can't feed all the folks who are there. And that island doesn't have all the natural resources that they will need, especially for their military. So they're not going to be able to have the petroleum products they need for aviation fuel or scrap metal to fix the planes and ships. So there you go. And Francisco Franco is going to overthrow a democratically elected government in Spain. So you've got some turmoil throughout the world. And Italy will get a dictator, Benito Mussolini, and they will start taking over some countries in Northern Africa, primarily Ethiopia, which off and on throughout history is a very wealthy country with a lot of natural resources. The US, Great Britain, and France, three of the largest, most powerful nations in the world, will all issue statements that none of these things should be happening, but they won't do anything to stop them. And a variety of reasons for those, for those reactions. Primarily, not our problem, and we're broke. Now, when it becomes our problem, it's going to be hard to stop, but there you go. And again, this is going to change the whole idea of acceptable foreign policy for all of these countries. It's true. All right, and Germany as well. All right, excuse me, so sorry. So Hitler invades the Rhineland in 1936, which is a violation of the Treaty of Versailles, part of the German territory that had been given to France as a result of World War I. which we, of course, called the Great War up until, you know, World War II. And freedom of speech starts to go away. And if you disagreed with Hitler, you went to jail or a concentration camp. Eventually, your property was confiscated. Certain groups were being members of those groups started to be banned during that era. And so there's a lot of suppression of freedom just in general in Germany. It's one of those, you know, the idea of the state is everything, the individual is nothing, which is, of course, the primary tenet of fascism. So even though what you have technically is National Socialism, there's no, I mean, that's, you know, that's how they got the name Nazi, part of the National Socialist Party. What's going on here is not, you know, democracy, socialism, that kind of stuff, even though I know, Hitler gets elected to certain offices democratically, but then starts to dissolve other offices, combine other offices, and then repress minority, dissident viewpoints, imprison, confiscate, that sort of thing. The US will pass neutrality acts, which is going to be a sign to everybody that our goal is to stay out of stuff. We're going to stay out of stuff. And we'll continue a policy of isolation, except, of course, where we sell stuff to both sides, which is, you know, it's our thing during World War I and World War II. Because again, we're the largest manufacturing nation. We got to make money, especially coming out of a Great Depression. So we are not really thinking about the morality of this right at first. Now we will shift to that, but not immediately. And this is also how your friend, not your friend, but Henry Ford gets all of these awards from the Nazi government, because he's going to be helpful in setting up some of their production models and selling certain things to the Nazis and to their military as well. So oops. And there's certainly a lot written about that if you want to do book review kind of stuff for that. All right. 1938, Germans and Soviets sign a non-aggression treaty, sometimes called the Nazi-Soviet Pact, and that's got a secret clause in it. And the secret clause is the public part of it is that they agree not to attack each other. The secret part of it is that the Germans have told the Russians they're going to invade Poland, and that when they invade Poland, they will give the Soviets the eastern part of Poland if they don't defend it. Because traditionally, there are ethnic groups in Poland that the Soviet Union, Russia before, would have been aligned with and would have defended. So Germany says, if you stay out of it, we'll split Poland with you. And Soviets go like, cool with us. But that, of course, is a secret part of that agreement. So then Germany invades Austria, which they said was part of Germany anyway. And of course, Hitler pretty famously has Austrian roots. Czechoslovakia, they first start with the Sudetenland, which is the German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia, and then take over the rest of it. And then when they invade Poland is when the war officially starts. Seems like that's September 1 of 39 when the invasion happens, and then the European nations who declare war on Germany do that on September 3 of 39. Now, the Munich Pact is an agreement between England, France, and Germany, where they meet with, where the government officials meet, and they tell Germany, look, we know you're small, you're crowded, you need more land, that kind of, yeah, we got that. Okay, so you can keep whatever you've taken so far, Rhineland, Austria, and Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia, as long as you promise not to invade, take over anybody else. And they agree to that. And then, of course, Hitler goes home and gives a speech to the Reichstag, the Congress of Germany, or the legislature, excuse me, of Germany, and lists the countries that they plan to invade in the very near future. So, you know, he never had an intention of keeping that. And the truth is, France and England just really didn't want to fight. They weren't up for it. They weren't prepared militarily. They're still broke. They've got their own problems. So they're telling Germany, just stop here. The leader of Germany, prime minister during that, prime minister of England during that time period is Neville Chamberlain, and he famously comes home and declares peace in our time. And then Winston Churchill, who is the head of the opposition party, says, this isn't peace in our time, it's appeasement. And if you appease a bully, he just takes more stuff, which is what Hitler did, Germany. So they invade, Germany invades Poland very quickly after. Within a year, it's, I think, 6 or 8 months, probably about 8. No, because I said it was September, right? So it was 8 or 9 months, or about 9 months of the Nazi-Soviet, the Munich Pact, excuse me. And then once Poland's invaded, the war officially begins. Now, if you study much of European history, and it's not my thing, but I've probably studied a little more than the average person. Most of the Jews who were living in Central and Eastern Europe during this time period lived in countries where governments were starting to persecute them. Lots of people internationally blame the Jews for the Great Depression because what they noticed when they looked around at all the banking and finance industries is that they maybe were disproportionately staffed, run by people of Jewish heritage, either ethnically, religiously, that sort of thing. And there was some accuracy to that, but it's because, traditionally certain countries had either been Catholic or Muslim, and then Crusades, you've read about this stuff a little bit. So people who were Jewish were neither Catholic nor Muslim. And in the countries where the Holy Roman Empire, what I'm saying instead of Catholic, where the Holy Roman Empire controlled those countries, they typically passed laws against things that were seen as mortal sins. One of those mortal sin sort of things was usury. Usury is where you charge excessive interest. So whatever excessive is to the church, if you charge that, it's a mortal sin and your soul is in danger of hell. So since most people don't want their souls to be in danger of going to hell, the church banned certain jobs for people who were Catholic/Christian. During that time period, of course, there's really just one church. There's not been a Reformation. So if you're Catholic, you're Christian, it's the same thing during the Holy Roman Empire. So to avoid going to hell, you also avoided being a banker or a money lender. So within your country, you got to have bankers and money lenders. You don't need too many in the old days where you're bartering, but you still need a few. And they're either going to have to be Muslims or Jews. And in a Holy Roman Empire, lots of people who were Jewish kind of agreed to convert to Catholicism, but got to continue to have those jobs involved in banking, money lending, that sort of thing, because no one seemed to care if their immortal souls might go to hell, but they did like them better than Muslims. So if you're wondering, like, does that even matter in the 20th century? Yeah, yes and no. The yes part is we are just emerging from a time period where you were probably, as a profession, whatever your parents were, because they apprenticed you, they taught you whatever their job was. And so, there were certain professions that were very traditional within certain families. So if you learned your profession from your parents, and your parents were bankers or money lenders, that's probably what you were going to be. Your parents were farmers, that's probably what you were going to be. I don't know what you'd do if your parents were pirates or something, because somebody had to be a pirate, right? But so within certain families, the tradition of being a banker, money lender was taught. And by the time we get to this era where people are just starting to go to school to learn their jobs, we still have a whole lot of families who are traditionally part of certain industries. So what I'm trying to say is there were still lots of Jewish families who had passed down their professional skills through their families. So that's why it seemed, and maybe sort of was, there sort of was an abundance or maybe a disproportionate number of people of a Jewish ethnicity or religion who were involved in banking and money lending. So people like conspiracies, they still do. I know you watch the news or the almost news, I don't know, talk shows and stuff where people talk about conspiracies and things. People have always liked those. So people thought, well, there's no way the economy could just be this bad. There must have been a secret evil plot. So perhaps the Jews planned this. Now, of course, it's not terribly logical that the people who control banking and finance would want the economy to crash, because I can't imagine that's really good for your industry if you cause the economy to crash. But still, it was a thing. People thought during this time period that the Jews must have wanted to destroy the economy. And that's also why when you see there's an American Nazi party, the German American Bund, they're fairly popular in the United States for a while. And you'll see a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric really throughout the world, Eastern Europe, or Europe, US, I guess the Western world, during this era. And it's also probably part of the reason people weren't as distressed about Hitler as they could have, should have been at first, when it's very clear what it is. It's fairly clear what he's trying to do. I think governments completely understood the parts where they have, secret foreign policy meetings. I think the average person probably generally understood. If that makes any sense. All right. Maybe that was too much about that. I don't know. Sorry. Okay. Meanwhile, back in the United States, we have declared our neutrality early, and our official trade policy is cash and carry. So this just means if you want to buy stuff from us, you got to pay for it up front, and you come and get it and take it home. We're not delivering it because we don't want to get involved in a world war like we did with the Great War / World War I, because somebody starts sinking our ships when we're transporting goods to other countries. So we don't want to unintentionally get involved in a war effort because of commerce. So if you want to buy stuff from us, you come get it, you pay for it, you take it home. If your ships get sunk in the process, we don't care, not our problem. Okay. All right, and then FDR says, you know what? The world is in turmoil, and you need a steady hand to keep the country going through the midst of this turmoil, and I'm your dude. So I'm going to run for term number 3. People had talked about it before. Nobody had really done it before. If you're wondering, are you wondering, like, why had no one done it before? Say yes or no. Just nod your heads. I can see them. I can't see them. Okay. Even if you're not wondering, I'm going to tell you. You knew that. I know you knew that. So it's George Washington. Always George Washington. George Washington only ran for 2 terms. He could have been president until he died. I'm certain of it, because we loved George Washington because he was almost perfect. I know you're going like, no, there was this. I know. But as a leader, there were certain things about him we really liked. Certainly in the era, seen as the father of our country, very noble in many ways. So, and pretty selfless in a lot of ways, at least as far as how he ran the country. So the thought was, if George Washington only served 2 terms, no one else should serve more than 2. So he set a precedent, but it wasn't a rule. There wasn't anything in the Constitution ever that set term limits for any office. There is now, by the way, but there wasn't then. So FDR said, you probably need someone who really knows what he's doing as stuff is going down in Europe. Of course, he said it a different way, and we're just starting to emerge from the Great Depression. So this 3rd term in office, he was elected in 32, then 36, and then 40. And you probably already know that he runs again in 44 and gets elected as well. So he's elected to 4 terms. He only serves a little bit of that 4th term because he died. But we'll talk about that later. I didn't mean to spoil that for you if you didn't already know. Now you don't even have to listen to the rest of the lecture. Keep listening, keep listening. Okay, so we proclaim neutrality as the war begins. Cash and carry. FDR runs for the 3rd term. FDR wins, and then it's pretty clear we're not going to be neutral, and we're going to switch from cash and carry pretty quickly. So right after re-election, FDR starts to refer to the United States as the arsenal of democracy. And so we're going to be the supplier for the war effort, whether it's food, whether it's materiel, war stuff. We're going to give folks what they need, whether they can afford it or not. So we're going to start something called the Lend-Lease policy in 1941. And the Lend-Lease policy says, you can't buy stuff, we will loan it to you. And in exchange for that, you can lease us some land in your country where we will build a base of military operations. Yes, a military base. That's why some of you in the military got to go serve in Germany or, you know, a few other places in Europe potentially, although we've closed some of those, but we still have a lot of them open. So the Lend-Lease policy gives, I think it's 99-year leases on military bases. Oh, okay, there you go. Somebody met their wife that way. Good job. All right, so way to go. Lend-Lease policy. It led to love for one of you, so that's outstanding. So we initiate the Lend-Lease policy, and of course, that's a sign that we think we're going to get involved in the war effort because we're going to want to have a base of operations there. So it will be easier to begin maneuvers. You don't have to travel as far. You get the idea. I know you. So, and England's broke. Great Britain is broke at this point because they've been paying for everything and they've had their British stiff upper lip and their finest hour and all those great Churchillian sort of phrases and things. And they've really kind of borne the brunt of the financial part of the war on their own on the Western Front. The Soviets will argue that they did that on their own on the Eastern Front, which is kind of true, but we didn't care about them, which is also kind of true, but you know, we're going to talk about the Soviets for a long time, so we'll have more of a chance. The Japanese have a lot of investments in the United States, which is helping to finance the war, and China, who had been our ally traditionally, was frustrated about this because we weren't doing anything to slow down the Japanese war effort, which is devastating the Pacific region. So FDR freezes Japanese assets, and Japan responds to that by saying, if you freeze our assets, then we will attack you. And then we say, well, do what you have to do. So FDR freezes Japanese assets in the United States, and the attack, which we completely expected to be in the Philippines and probably honestly didn't care so much, ends up at Pearl Harbor, which we did care about quite a bit more because that is part of official US territory. Hawaii is not a state yet, but certainly official US territory. And we have a naval base there. And of course, the attack is pretty devastating. Not as devastating as they had hoped. It doesn't sink aircraft carriers because they're not there. They're out on some sort of maneuvers. But it is the date that will live in infamy. So, you know, I probably will have a multiple choice question about the date of Pearl Harbor because it doesn't live in infamy if you don't know it. I feel like I have a responsibility to not make FDR's statement untrue. So I'm just foreshadowing. Can we foreshadow in a history class? Predicting that you will have a question that asks when Pearl Harbor happened. I'm just saying. Okay. Now, and somebody said they got to go visit that. I'm sure that museum is pretty overwhelming. That's some rough stuff because there's still ships in the harbor, and no, it's a rough thing for sure. So when Japan attacks the United States at Pearl Harbor, excuse me, I'm not upset. I mean, I would have been upset about it if I'd been alive then. Excuse me, just something in my throat. December 7th, 1941, which is what FDR says, the date that will live in infamy in his speech where he asks for a declaration of war. The way that declaring war happens constitutionally in the United States, we've certainly done something similar to war that wasn't quite constitutional. I'm not saying it wasn't legitimate. I'm just saying they didn't follow these procedures. Is the president goes to the Congress and asks for a formal declaration of war, and then the Congress, House and Senate, have a full session where they vote and decide. So Congress has to be the official declarer of war, and that has to come after the president has asked for a declaration of war, which is why we're not at war immediately, like seconds after this happens, and why it doesn't happen the same day. It happens on a Sunday, kind of a Sunday, well, not kind of, it was a Sunday morning, early, where people are either sleeping in, golfing, going to church, whatever people are doing on a Sunday morning. And there were actually, it seems like there are actually emissaries in, I think it's Cordell Hull is the Secretary of State during this time period. I'm really sure it is. But there were people in his office from Japan who were going to talk about ways that maybe they could work through some of the issues that the United States had with Japan when this happened. And when it was announced, they apparently just got up and left. And of course, we closed the embassy, so they go back to. All right. And again, my apologies to those of you who love military history, because in the survey class, we really, we don't talk about it as much as you might like. I should have checked this before to see if the timeline is still available. Well, let me try. Why isn't that coming up? Oh, click and something else. Control and click. All right. I don't know if you can see it. I hate to even say that after teaching on Zoom for 100 years, but the purpose of the World War II timeline really is just to give you, this gives you the whole story. And this is a pretty solid World War II timeline. So it tells you, oh, and it advertises some stuff too, but it tells you some good ads there for people looking at World War II, I suppose. Oh, you're not seeing it? Okay, hang on. Let me try again. All right, so sorry. Oh, there it is. Okay. Cerna. Someday I'll get better at this. But there's a link in the lecture notes, and so this is what shows, and hopefully you can see it now. But it tells you kind of how everything starts. It doesn't go all the way back to, rumblings in 36 or anything, but it does go back to 38. So it goes back pretty far, and then tells you most of the important things that happen. I don't know that would tell you, anything could tell you all the important things, but it's pretty solid, I think. So if you ever want to know like the whole scope of it and more of the European stuff and the Northern African stuff. And one of the things that I think my younger students would always have an issue with is they really, I don't know, especially I'm going to make sexist comments, although I know I typically do that from time to time. I'm sorry. I used to do that for fun when I taught high school, really just to see if people were paying attention. And I remember some young man got really angry with me one day and started screaming at me about how just because I hated men didn't mean that I needed to be sexist and that kind of stuff. I went, I got a dad and 3 brothers and a husband. I really like them all, so I'm sorry. I was just kind of kidding around. So, What was my sexist statement going to be? Crud. What was my sexist statement going to be? Dang, I spoiled my own sexist statement. Let me look at the notes, see if my sexist statement comes back to my mind. I don't think it's going to. Crud. I hate it when I'm trying to say sexist stuff and can't remember. Oh, well. I guess it's a sign it's not really super sexist. But the timeline, I think, is really useful. Again, our purpose here is not necessarily to go through military history. Maybe I was just going to say guys typically like military. It's not terribly sexist, but it's a little. There was something else I was going to say that's going to be, oh, I know what it was. Guys, young guys, always think that when the U.S. enters the war, it's automatically over. People just go like, the United States is here, we quit. Well, you know how sometimes people think that the United States has trouble with prejudice and racial issues, mostly because we do. Other countries as well have the same issues. This seems to be shocking to people. It's like, for some reason, we think the only racists that have ever lived in the United States. I think it's a little more of a human condition than a US condition. So our opponents in Japan thought that they were the master race and that we were, especially white people, but the US in general, were super weak because we live these soft, happy American lives. And there was no way we were going to be willing to sacrifice anything because we were just used to having cushy lives, that kind of thing. So they really didn't think the US military would be very strong, that they would surrender very quickly, that sort of thing. They didn't think that they would be nearly as strong as Asian fighters in general, but especially Japanese fighters. And Japanese thought they were the master race. Clearly, the German-ish people thought that they were the master race. People who had kind of talked about the white man's burden a little earlier in this era just thought in general white people were superior. So it just seems that in certain places at certain times, people just think they're superior and everybody else is weak and is going to fold once they see whoever the superior race is on the scene. So my high school students would always think as soon as the US showed up, everybody would quake in their boots and they would surrender. And that's not exactly how this worked for the Germans or the Japanese. However, I think it was, who was it? Admiral Yamamoto, who said, oh, that sounded almost Texan there the first time, that all they had done by attacking Pearl Harbor was awakened a sleeping giant. So I think he had a pretty good understanding of the military and industrial capability of the United States, which is going to become the arsenal of democracy, as FDR predicted. So the ability of the United States to produce things faster than Japan and Germany could destroy things is going to be very crucial in World War II. Now, I guess because I got excited about embedding charts in my notes during when I was making these over the last edition of the book, I put in battle charts. So not all of these battles. Remember, you're going to have 4 questions, maybe 5 over World War II. So not all of these charts will be, or not all of these battles. Yeah. I think your comment about the wars in general is right. Everybody seems to think that whoever they are going to win the war very quickly and it won't take long. I know people thought that with the US Civil War. The North thought they'd win right away. The South thought they'd win right away because the North didn't care that much. Clearly, neither side won right away. Certainly, the Germans thought they could overtake all of Europe very quickly, and they did, except for England, who held them off. And until the United States could decide they wanted to get involved with a little prompting clearly from Japan. So yeah, no, you're right. Everybody thinks every war is going to be fast. And Typically, they're not. There are a few that have been, but Spanish-American War, Gulf War in 1990s, yeah, it was relatively fast. But the end results of both of those things were not fast. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, because I am. All right, so the way that I've divided up the battles is, and I don't know what the deal is with that T right there. I should probably, I'm gonna erase it at least for now. Probably not on the permanent version, but okay. These are divided by Atlantic Theater and Pacific Theater. So we're talking Europe and Asia is primarily what we're talking here. One of the things you'll notice if you look at the dates, United States gets in December 8th, 1941. Of course, we're not going to send stuff over right away or people over right away because that's, you know, you just can't. Logistically, you just can't. But you will notice that fighting starts early mid 42 and that it ends in 45. So this is very much a long-term process. And some of these battles, like Battle of the Atlantic, was not a specific battle, but this is the general sinking of ships in the Atlantic Ocean by, essentially by the Germans. And when the Soviet Union becomes part of the Allies is once Hitler starts to attack the Soviet Union. They stayed neutral until the assault on the Soviet Union begins by the Germans. So, you know, they were content with splitting up Poland at first. And then the Soviet Union becomes part of the Allies. And I think it's just it's not historically accurate. It's just kind of a figment of, or feature, tendency of people my age, pre-Cold War people, or Cold War people, that we tend to refer to Russia and the Soviet Union as the same thing. I promise I know that they weren't the same thing. So sorry, but I do write that occasionally in the notes. So old people problems. Yeah, maybe your parents or grandparents do the same thing. So on behalf of all old people, I apologize for our geographic inaccuracies. Sorry. Okay. So once the shipping gets more controlled in the Atlantic, and at first, you know, it's an invention of things like sonar, which I think the technology of that came from some European actress. I think it was Hedy Lamarr. She was kind of a pinup girl, but also a physicist, which is an interesting combo, isn't it? But once they were able to detect the submarines and destroy them, that made a difference. Before that, really what we were able to do is build ships faster than they could sink them. So, you know, there's that. Battle of Stalingrad is where Hitler's advance starts to, stops, and then the Germans are pushed back through the Soviet Union, through Poland, and then back into Germany. But I won't read all of these to you, but we'll talk next time, because I know we don't have that much time left, about which battles were maybe most important. But I did try to highlight some of the more important battles of World War II. Now, Pacific Theater, of course, the Asian side of the fighting, you really don't see the first actual kind of victory, rather than just sort of neutral, like, until the Battle of Midway, which is considered the first major victory and the first defeat of the modern Japanese Navy. So that's a huge deal. That is a huge deal. And I just said I wasn't going to talk about these battles, so I'm going to stop, because I'm going to close this so I don't keep talking about them. But some really interesting stuff. I'm going to suggest to you that for your book review, if you're one of those people who at first said, this is the part of the class I was waiting for, you may want to pick a book from this era. And you could pick a book about a person who is important to, not Hitler though, please don't write about Hitler. Oh my gosh, he is not from the United States. Don't, it's US history. And then there's always somebody who wants to write about the Holocaust, and I think that's tricky because that didn't exactly happen in the United States. However, you just have to write about the Holocaust. I don't know if I left it on the book list or not. I would suggest a book called, because it has, I didn't say the name of it, I know. But I would suggest, I'm going to type it in case, yeah, you could definitely write about Japanese internment. And I'll try, I don't know if I can do it, I'll try to show you a video next time. My absolutely, this sounds stupid, but I'm going to say it. My favorite video about Japanese internment, because it's made by the US government explaining why Japanese internment was necessary. And anytime you can get your own government in their own words to explain something stupid that we did, it's kind of interesting, my opinion. Okay. But the Holocaust book that I think is acceptable, and it's not exactly a Holocaust book, but it's kind of a Holocaust book, is a book called All But My Life. And I might be spelling this woman's name wrong because, you know, I could be. All But My Life by Gerda Weissman Klein. And she'll end up making a little movie about, like a documentary kind of movie that wins a whatever award, Grammy, Emmy, I think. I don't know, whatever you win. But she was in a concentration camp that was liberated by American forces. She ends up marrying the soldier that she first met when they were liberating the camp. And he was a Jewish American fellow, Kurt Klein. Really kind of an interesting and kind of tragic, but mostly interesting and uplifting and that kind of thing. But the reason I know is that you want to read Mouse or something like that, but no, because it needs to have a U.S. connection if possible. Yeah, but you could pick a general, a military person. You know, you could pick Patton or Eisenhower or uh, anybody that you wanted to that has to do with World War II. You could pick a battle and, you know, a book about a battle. You honestly, for the book review, I'd really like for you to read something you want to know about, you know, because I think you'll actually read the book, you'll remember it, and you'll like it. I mean, the goal of reading a book is, I mean, should be pleasurable. Hopefully, I know textbooks are different, but pleasurable and that you'll learn stuff. So, all right, I am probably going to stop recording here because I feel like I've said enough.